Hi, welcome back to the basement. I'm Steve Lewis. Today I'd like to continue talking about odd Beach Boy tracks of the 90s. These are tracks that either the band or individual members contributed to one-off special projects. And now that we're into the mid and late 90s, it's mostly Brian Wilson solo tracks and it's mostly about tribute albums. Case in point being the first album up, Till the Night Is Gone, a tribute to Doc Pomus, which was released March 28, 1995. Doc Pomus, of course, with his writing partner Mort Schumann, was one of the great writing teams of the early rock era. Interestingly, Doc Pomus's first major breakthrough came when he was credited with another major writing duo on the song Youngblood. He was credited along with Lieber and Stoller. Later, with his partner Mort Schumann, he wrote such great hits as Teenager in Love for Dion, Save the Last Dance for Me for the Drifters, Hushabye, This Magic Moment, and for Elvis he wrote Little Sister, Surrender, Suspicion, Marie's the Name of His Latest Flame, Viva Las Vegas, among many others. Doc Pomus had passed away March 14, 1991, so the tribute album came about 4 years after his passing. Brian's contribution was the track Sweets for My Sweet, which had been a number 16 hit in 1961 for the Drifters, and though it never charted in the US, the Searchers had a number 1 hit with it in the UK in 1963. Brian's version is performed and produced purely with Brian and Andy Paley, providing all the instrumentation and all the many, many backing vocals. The CD came complete with a thick 27-page booklet and included a short kind of generic quote from Brian saying, "Doc Pomus and Mort Schumann's songs reflect the true American spirit, which I really admire. It was a pleasure recording Sweets for My Sweet for Doc's tribute album." Brian's version of Sweets for My Sweets is pretty good. It's got a nice driving quality to it. And for a track featuring only 2 musicians, Brian and Andy Paley, there must have been a lot of overdubbing going on because there are thick banks of instrumentation and backing vocals throughout. Brian's lead vocal is kind of what you'd expect from the period. It's a little wild, but it's a very strong track. There is one area that kind of mystifies me. There's a cappella break in the middle where all the instruments are mixed out, and it ends at 1 minute 23 seconds with one of the worst edits I've ever heard. It just really sounds like a terrible edit to me. Maybe it's just my ears, but I really can't believe that Brian and Andy Paley let that get by. Anyway, edits aside, it's a strong track and a great thing to have. By the way, pulling out the CD booklet for this thing, I was reminded how diabolical CDs were. This thing is too thick to fit properly in behind these little teeth in the jewel case. So you practically have to tear up the back of the booklet to get it in and out of the jewel case. I forgot how terrible that was. And I remember if you had a cover that was too thin, it would pop out of the jewel case and get bent when you opened and closed it. These jewel cases were really kind of diabolical things. I can't believe that we were so eager to embrace CDs in the 90s. Anyway, that rant aside, let's return to Brian Wilson and talk about his contribution to another tribute album that came out only a month and a half later. That album was For the Love of Harry, Everybody Sings Nilsson, and the track was This Could Be the Night, which was an especially interesting and appropriate choice for Brian Wilson. It's an early Harry Nilsson composition being written in late 65 or early 66, and Harry Nilsson said was written as a tribute to Brian Wilson. It was first recorded by Phil Spector for the Modern Folk Quartet. Apparently Spector was interested in getting into the folk rock sounds that were being pioneered at the time by the likes of the Byrds. For whatever reason, he quickly abandoned the Modern Folk Quartet after recording This Could Be the Night, and turned his attention instead to his giant production for Ike and Tina Turner, River Deep, Mountain High. Not wanting to waste the track, Phil Spector used it as the opening theme for 1966's The Big TNT Show. This was sort of a sequel to the Tammy Show from 1964 and featured Phil Spector as the musical director. If the Modern Folk Quartet recording was meant to be Phil Spector's entry into folk rock, it's a really strange recording. There's nothing particularly folky about it. It's got the Phil Spector wall of sound with guitars mixed up to the front, but the guitars don't sound anything like the McGuinn shimmering 12-string sound of the Byrds. If anything, they sound like cat meows. It's not bad, but it certainly doesn't make you think of folk rock. Additionally, while the song is copyrighted to Harry Nilsson, in the opening credits of the TNT show, it's shown as written by Phil Spector. Nilsson demoed the song for the Monkees in 1967. It would have been a good choice for them. I'm sure they'd have done a nice job with it. But they passed on it, which is kind of understandable. I can see that they might not have wanted to re-record the theme song from last year's TNT show. That would have seemed kind of an odd choice for them. The first official release of the song seems to have come on 1975's David Cassidy album, The Higher They Climb. There were several other obscure versions of it recorded over the years. Brian Wilson seems to have long been aware of the track. Melody Maker, the UK paper, reported him playing it for guests on the piano in 1973, and apparently he also considered recording it with American Spring in the early 70s, but reported that he was having trouble getting the lyrics from Phil Spector for some reason he couldn't understand. Brian's version, again, is pretty much produced and played by himself and Andy Paley, this time with the addition of Jonathan Paley on bass and Tommy Morgan on harmonica. It's clearly modeled on Spector's version, having those same cat meow guitar licks featured throughout. Having been written with Brian in mind, it's certainly easily within Brian's wheelhouse to cover This Could Be the Night. The strangest thing to me about it is the lead vocal doesn't sound particularly like Brian. He's more restrained than usual. Maybe he was having a little trouble singing it for some reason, I'm not sure. It's fine, it just doesn't particularly sound like what we expect from Brian Wilson in 1995, for better or worse. It's a nice track, I love the song, and a really good contribution to this tribute album to Harry Nilsson. Brian Wilson and Andy Paley, of course, worked extensively together during this period and recorded a lot of originals which have been widely bootlegged. I believe the only track that was commercially released at the time was an instrumental called In My Moon Dreams, which appeared on the Delphi Donna compilation Pulp Surfin' in 1995. This is a really odd compilation, and I remember the first thing that surprised me was the fact that Donna and Delphi actually existed as labels. I thought they had long been defunct. Delphi, of course, is a label I most associate with Ritchie Valens, and Donna, their sub-label, was named for Ritchie Valens' 1958 hit, and that's something that I most associate with early Bruce Johnston recordings. Apparently, Bob Keane, who owned both labels, moved on to the Mustang label in 1964, where he had success with the Bobby Fuller 4. By 1967, all of Bob Keane's labels had gone defunct. It wasn't until 1994 when Delphi recordings by the Lively Ones and the Centurions were used in the film Pulp Fiction that he revived the label. This is, I'm sure, why there is a parody of Pulp Fiction on the cover of this compilation. It claims to be from the vaults of Delphi Records, and it's a collection of mostly older recordings with a few new ones sprinkled in, including Brian Wilson and Andy Paley's In My Moon Dreams. It also included the 1981 novelty single Jacques Cousteau, credited to the Young Jocks, who were Andy Paley, his brother Jonathan, the Paley brothers, Elliot Easton, who was later a member of the Cars, and many others. It was apparently a favorite on the Dr. Demento show. I'm not sure how In My Moon Dreams ended up on this compilation, which is mainly surf instrumentals from the Delphi vaults of the early 60s. Maybe the Young Jocks connection provides a clue, I'm not really sure. Thematically, the song fits right in. It's credited to Andy Paley as the writer, and it features surf guitar and a nice piano, kind of retro with its surf guitar. The track itself is credited to Brian Wilson and Andy Paley, and you can clearly hear Brian on the oohs and ahs in the background vocals. It's a slight track, but nice to have, and a very interesting release from Brian Wilson and Andy Paley. Next up, we have another instrumental release. The inclusion of Brian Wilson and Tony Asher's song This Isn't Love on Songs Without Words, a Windham Hill collection, is nearly as mysterious as his inclusion on the Pulp Surfing collection. By 1997, the Windham Hill label had mainly become known as purveyors of what we had come to call New Age music, and most of the performances on this CD are from Windham Hill artists, with a few exceptions such as Carole King, Stephen Sondheim, and of course, Brian Wilson. All the songs on the album are piano instrumentals, and the title, Songs Without Words, might refer to another group of piano instrumentals written by Felix Mendelssohn between 1829 and 1845, which were also known under the collective title Songs Without Words. Talking about the track This Isn't Love inside the package, Brian is quoted as saying, "The song started back in 1980 when I wrote the first musical phrase, but I never finished the song. Then, last year, I started working with my old friend Tony Asher. I come up with a chord pattern and a tune and sometimes an idea of what I want to say, and he comes up with the lyrics that fit the feeling of what I'm trying to get across. As usual, he wrote great lyrics for it, and someday I'll record it with a vocal. I was feeling very good about my life and my music at the time. As you'd guess, it's the very melodic opening section of the song that comes across best as a piano instrumental, the syncopated rhythmic middle section a little bit less so. Brian finally released a full band version of it with Tony Asher's lyric in 2000 on the album Brian Wilson Live at the Roxy Theater. The thing that I really find charming about this album now has nothing to do with the music. It's billed as an enhanced CD, and that's because, according to this little flyer included inside in 1997, you can use the disc to get 50 free hours of America Online, and the flyer goes on to explain what the internet is. It tells you that with 50 free hours of AOL, you can find out more about your favorite artists, explore the internet, exchange emails worldwide, meet new people, download music and video, sell your car, book a vacation, get investment tips, and pull up instant news, scores, and more. Oh, how innocent we were in those days. The reverse side of the flyer gives you detailed step-by-step instructions on how to use the disc to access the internet using either Windows 95 or alternatively your Macintosh, and sign up for America Online. It's just a little reminder of how different the world of the mid to late 90s actually was. Finally, I'd like to talk about a release from 1999, which is arguably the first Alan Jardine solo recording. It came on the Garth Brooks tribute CD, New Friends in Low Places. The album was released on the Purple Pyramid label, which is an LA-based sub-label of Cleopatra. Cleopatra is a label that specializes in goth recordings, and Purple Pyramid, as far as I can see, specializes in sort of prog rock. Apparently in the late 90s, they were dabbling with doing tribute albums. Al Jardine is arguably the biggest name on this compilation. Denny Lane from the Moody Blues and Wings also appears on a separate track. Alan and his son Matt are featured on the track Papa Loved Mama, which had been a number 3 hit on the country chart for Garth Brooks in 1992. The album features all the same players on every track and the same producer with a couple of exceptions. So my feeling is this was probably recorded and then the guests were brought in to add their vocals later. So Al is really just a guest here along with Matt. This is probably the reason that the recordings by and large are very faithful to the originals. On the Papa Love Mama track, I really can't hear much that sounds like Alan. This may be because Matt's singing lead on most of it. I'm not sure that I recognize Matt's voice. It may also be that they're just trying to sound like Garth Brooks. But in any case, I think if you just heard this track on the radio, you wouldn't have any idea it was Al Jardine, despite his very distinctive voice. Trying to get an idea for how Al Jardine became involved in this project, I noticed that Gary Griffin, longtime Beach Boy associate, was involved in this, as was Lanny Cordola, who along with Gary Griffin did some of the production duties on the Summer in Paradise album for the Beach Boys in 1992. Lanny Cordola was in the band Guthria, House of Lords, and some other bands, and it was really interesting, I didn't know this, since 2012 he has been in Kabul, Afghanistan, teaching guitar to street kids. And there is an amazing video that I found. I didn't know about this before. It's from 2017, so it's been around for a while. Maybe everybody knows about it but me. Where Brian Wilson provided vocals and video for Love and Mercy, it's a new recording of that, to Lanny Cordola's project called Miraculous Love Kids. And they've put together this video that you can find on Lanny Cordola's site here on YouTube. Please check this out. It is really fantastic. It's really moving. It's a great thing. I didn't know about it before, but please check that out. If you take away anything from this episode, it should not be so much about the Beach Boys in the 90s as about Lanny Cordola's project and this great video featuring Brian Wilson and the Miraculous Love Kids of Kabul, Afghanistan. Please, please take a look at that if you don't know about it. Hope you enjoyed this. That takes us through the 90s. Now, it's always hard to know what to leave in and leave out. There are a lot of collaborations. I'm going to talk about collaborations separately. I tried to just do tracks that were sort of solo releases in unusual places. Hope you enjoyed this. We'll be back with something different next week. Please comment, like, and if you haven't subscribed, please do. Thank you very much for watching. Bye.